Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I've just returned from the best summer OR trade show I've ever been to. But if I'm to keep it real, it's the only summer OR trade show that I've ever been to, and it was quite disappointing. First and foremost, the show was small. You could walk every nook and cranny of the show in 2 hours max. And the brands you saw in the hallways, well, they were mostly brands I didn't know or know that well, and a bunch of licensed products. And for each product category at the show, you could look at it as the fifth best in class in that category, well, they attended this show. For example, in the keep things hot and cold category, I look at the top brands in the world as number 1, Stanley, of course, number 2, Yeti, number 3, Hydro Flask, number 4, Who Knows, and number 5, the fifth best was Orca, and Orca was at the trade show, no one else was. It was really crazy to be there and feel like I was witnessing firsthand the demise of an industry powerhouse. And it's a shame too, because I really like the people behind the show, and I believe these shows can be saved, but a lot of things would need to happen to get everyone back on board. And timing is the most important thing that would need to change. There's a reason that the regional shows leading up to Winter OR are so busy, and it's because that's when the business is done. There's no need for a dog and pony show, and that's what these shows have turned into, and the brands are finally starting to figure that out. Anyways, Polar was there, and I had interviewed Karma Vela years ago when he had been fired from the brand that he started, and he was crushed back then. But in a strange series of events, Karma is now back with Polar, and the dude who fired him, well, he's now gone. So I had never met Karma before, but I saw him, and I walked up to him from behind as he was in mid-conversation. And the only thing I hear him say is, the Powell movement. And I'm like, whoa, you saw me? That's crazy because I was behind you, but nice to meet you. But here's what really happened. So when I walked up here, totally out of random, you were talking to 2 or 3 strangers or 2 or 3 reps, I don't know who they were, and kind of break down what happened.
One of the reps had mentioned that an account said he should listen to the podcast that I did with you, and the client, I guess it was a shop, had asked, what podcast is it? And I said, the Powell movement, the moment you walked up. Literally, that was creepy, crazy.
So that was a wild way to meet Karma, and then I really got to catch up with him and talk shop. And that was my plan, to go to the show and to come away with a podcast. But really, there was no one for me to interview other than Karma and Conrad Anchor. And I couldn't find Conrad. I could have recorded with random people, but that's not why you listen to this show, and I know that, so I wasn't going to waste your time. So here is what I got from Karma at OR. So I'm at OR with Karma Vela. I'm pulling down the mask. Last time I talked to you, you weren't working for Polar, and you had founded the brand, and you were kind of pushed out of the brand. Over the past 4 years, things have changed. What's your title at Polar now?
Brand director.
Okay. So you're running the marketing and the look and feel of the brand for the globe?
Yeah, with more of a focus on product.
Okay.
Yep.
Because you're the one who invented like the
knapsack.
Yeah, the signature product of Polar. And so we're an outdoor retailer, and I look around, and a lot of the brands that I see here are brands that I don't know that well, to tell you the truth. When I think of Winter OR, I think of brands like Polar and other lifestyle brands. What makes this show so different that I don't know the brands?
I mean, the pandemic obviously has a lot to do with it. A lot of companies didn't feel safe, but I think OR's taking the precautions to make everyone feel safe. You can wear a mask if you want, obviously. You don't have to. They said only if you're vaxxed, you can not wear it. So, yeah, I think it's just light because of the pandemic, honestly.
But the pandemic has created a spike in sales for everybody in the outdoor business. Did you guys have that big fear in the beginning at first? Like, holy shit, what's going to happen?
We did, because we turned the lights back on with the company in, December of 19. A few months later, pandemic hits, and we were like, well, see what happens. But because of that, it made more people discover the outdoors, get back into the outdoors. And obviously, as we all have seen, anything done locally, regionally with camping, cycling, hiking, you name it, it's surged. So we were fortunate enough to be in that wave.
And with the growth, I would think, because you're selling a ton of product, does it create a bottleneck at the factory level where it's hard to get as much product as you want over here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a struggle for sure with factories. And just, shipping vessels coming here, not being able to unload at port and get back to pick up more stuff. So that's been an issue. I mean, that's, over and over, there's just been issues with shipping and logistics.
And with the shift that we see to the outdoor sports, we were talking about people who have never gotten into them before are now into outdoors because that was the one thing to do during the pandemic. What do you think about now? Are we going to continue to see the trend kind of grow? Is it going to be a slow growth, or was it the spike in the beginning and then a slow growth, or what's going to happen?
I hope it keeps going. I know that a lot of people will probably go back to, Disneyland trips or like Hawaii, Mexico, actually destination vacations that now you can fly a little easier. But I think a lot of people maybe discover the outdoors for the first time and they're hooked. So hopefully they stick around.
So that was the OR trade show. And while I didn't get a podcast out of it, I do have another amazing show this week, and it's a little bit different than what I usually do. I've already talked to Dan Egan about his incredible Hall of Fame life and times in part 1 of his podcast. The only thing we really didn't talk about in detail was his incredible week on Mount Elbrus in 1990. The one where he almost died and 15 other people passed. I read the story in Dan's new book, 30 Years in a White Haze, and when I finished the book a couple weeks ago, I got in touch with Dan and I was like, will you please tell this story with me on the podcast, and we can also shoot the shit about the Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame? And Dan is an easy yes, and was like, let's do this. And before we do this, I need to ask you to tell a friend about the podcast, follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement, and buy something from the great brands who support the show. They are Stanley, the 10 Barrel Brewery, Dragon, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Alpine Vans, and Rollerblade. Now, let's talk with Dan Egan.
Mikey.
Dan, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Oh, pretty good, thank you. Just got back from a trip to OR with Roy Tuscany and hung with him for a few days, so it's pretty fun.
Oh, that's great. How's he doing, man? He's an amazing guy.
Yeah, he's doing fantastic. He was up for I think it was Innovator of the Year for OR.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so he was pretty excited about it, and I think that's the only reason he went. But the show itself is dying.
Yeah, so what's the real scoop? Because they're trying to make it sound like it was the greatest show on earth,
It was the saddest trade show I've ever been to. The coolest brand that was there in terms of like lifestyle was Polar, the brand that makes tents.
Yeah.
And they're small time. And then Kavu was one of the bigger brands, but it was dead, man. I didn't know any people, and the brands were all like licensed products, it seemed like. So you saw a lot of Hurley paddle boards and shit like that had bad logos on it, and it was a joke.
Okay. Jesus, man. What happened? Where did it all go, dude? I have no idea. Holy shit.
I mean, you can blame some of it on COVID, I guess, but
right.
I was in marketing for forever, and a trade show would cost K2 $250 grand all in when you think about booth space, product, flights, everything. And at this point in time with the internet, like I can take that $250 grand and I can sell $1 million of the product with it. I can buy it,
Exactly.
pretty much.
Exactly.
So I think everything changes for them. But how's life with you?
Things are great, man. I love summer. Been sailing my boat on Squam Lake and remodeling my kitchen. I'm living without a stove, living without a sink, just camping out this winter, working on the house, just the way I like it. Yeah, beautiful.
Nice. Well, I thank you for sending me a copy of your book. I got it like the day before I went to Hawaii, and I read it on the plane. I read it while I was by the pool, and I finished it on the way home.
I appreciate that.
It's fantastic, man. It's really a great book.
I appreciate that. Thank you very, very much. Yeah.
I think all the listeners should check it out, not just for the story about Elbrus that we're going to talk about, but just the ski history. I mean, for me, ski history that I really care about starts with the hot dogging group and kind of moves forward.
Yeah.
And your book does a great job of outlining every detail of the hot dog group through moguls, through extreme. So it takes you all the way to today. You talk about McConkey and all those people as well. So it's like a really good modern ski history for people that don't care about leather boots, which is pretty awesome.
And that was part of the goal. So I appreciate that. Yeah, that's what we were after.
But what we're going to talk about a lot on this podcast is your trip to Mount Elbrus. And that's probably the most game-changing trip of your life. And it all becomes true because of sponsors. It's like a sales promotional trip with the Egan brothers. You're working with a brand called Degree 7. And what is that brand all about?
Well, Degree 7 was Patrick Vallecant's clothing brand. And as you know, Patrick was the godfather of extreme skiing. He was my brother John's hero and idol. John and Patrick had crossed paths in Chamonix in the mid-'80s. And Patrick was really the guy who was taken over where Sylvain Sedan had left off, the ski over the impossible, and Marc-Jean Prevent, what he was doing. And Patrick had this clothing brand. Patrick also had his own guide school in Chamonix. So when Degree 7 started to be sold in the US, we saw Degree 7 at the SIA show in Vegas one year and instantly started talking to them because that was right on brand for us, Patrick Vallecant. We were skiing for the North Face, but those contracts at the time, really the exclusivity was North Face and Schmidt, and the door was open for us to do our own thing as long as we still skied in the North Face film in North Face. So we agreed to ski and be endorsed by and paid by Degree 7 in the Warren Miller films. And that's all the crazy pink suits and the lime green suits and all that sort of stuff. The one thing about Degree 7 was the quality of the clothing. I mean, that was bomber. And I credit Degree 7 clothing for saving my life on Elbrus because I spent the night in that outfit and it was unbelievable.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you about that later on as we get into it even deeper. And Patrick, he ends up passing away, I believe, a year before the trip to Mount Elbrus. Was he a friend of yours as well as John's?
I had never met Patrick. He passed before we did the deal with Degree 7. And, I had only heard the stories. And of course, in 30 Years with the White Haze, we encountered when Patrick picked John up hitchhiking in Chamonix.
Yeah.
And it's a great, great story because John and Tom Day were following Patrick all around Chamonix. And John says to Patrick in the car, "Yeah, we've been following you." And Patrick laughs and goes, "I know." And John says, "Why do you laugh?" And he goes, "Because you Americans don't have a rope." And John and Tom were jumping over the crevasses and things on the glacier, and those guys were roped up. So it's kind of a cool interaction.
So was he one of the first ski heroes you have that dies?
That's a great question. I mean, he actually is. I mean, that started, Patrick passing, Prevent passing, that really left an impact.
And it's something that's not going to scare you away. Your passion is still a head deeper into the mountains. It's just shit happens sometimes with some people in some situations. But you're going out on this trip with Degree 7, and it's a promotional trip. And is the whole idea behind it like, hey, buy something, you can win a trip to Elbrus, and you're going to climb and ski with the famous Egan brothers? Is that kind of how they're selling it?
Yeah, they sold it in two ways. One, enter the contest, and if you bought any item of clothing in any of the 7 territories they were sold in, you automatically entered into the contest. The trip was to celebrate Patrick's life, and it was the brand attempt to bring the Chamonix extremists and the American extremists together. So the guides on the trip were the Vallecant guides from Chamonix, and we were the U.S. representation of the brand. So that sort of was the pitch of the promotion, but that really isn't what happened in the end. There wasn't a lot of love between the Chamonix guides and us. It wasn't very smooth.
But it's a cool idea to create this trip and bring all these random people out. But do you ever think in the back of your head, like, hey, this might be a horrible idea because someone might win and they might not know what they're doing and we're going to have to get them off the mountain alive?
I mean, at first, of course, we were so excited about the trip. We were planning for it all winter. When we went through Chamonix that season, we geared up. We bought our new Dynafit boots and bindings, and we got our harnesses, and we got all geared up for this trip for May. And we weren't thinking too much about the promotional end. We were thinking about this is going to be on ESPN, the film, all that it could be. But let me tell you, the moment we landed in Paris and met the winners of the trip, it was evident that this is a crazy idea.
Was it because of the language barrier, or was it because of just looking at the people like, I don't know if they're going to be fit to survive out in these elements?
All of the above. I mean, we had a school teacher, a banker, it was across the board. The ages were across the board. The languages were across the board. And, it's easy to forget because of the world we live in today, how interconnected we all are,
Yep.
But traveling in the late 80s, early 90s, it's not that way. It's not like we FaceTimed each other. We just meet in Paris and we get on a plane and we're together for the next 14, 15 days, and we're going to altitude. And John and I are looking at each other like, what is this going to look like? The Chamonix guides are adding a new angle to that because, they're French and standoffish, and we were young and upstarts. And then you have the winners who are just on cloud nine. They're
Right.
going to Russia. It's still a communist country. It's weird times all around.
And you guys are going with a massive group. It sounds like a logistical nightmare. There's 23 people from 9 different countries. And one of the big red flags before anything happens in the trip is one of the winners, her husband is a doctor. He is going to be her +1 on the trip. And 24 hours before you're supposed to get on a plane to go to this game-changing, life-changing trip, you find out that, or you make that doctor the trip doctor. And is that a big red flag? Like 24 hours before the trip is when you're naming the doctor?
Exactly. They hadn't thought that through any. Dot Helling and John Helling. Dot had won the trip and was a journalist. Her husband at the time, John, he ends up thankfully being sort of the unsung hero of the trip. But yeah, that was an add-on at the last minute, which nobody could foresee how important that would be. And to set that whole stage up, I mean, it's the Cold War. The Iron Curtain is still not completely down. Gorbachev is still in power. He's trying to change the world, but people are trying not to have a change on their side. And it was crazy time in the world. And if you're a kid of the 70s and the 80s growing up in the Cold War and nuclear bomb shelters, hiding under your desk, all those sort of things that we grew up with.
Yeah.
Going to Russia is like going to the dark side. You don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah, it's scary shit. I would think that they probably have people watching you. I think of like Rocky going over there and training and all the Russians watching Rocky. And when you go to Moscow, do you feel like there's people shadowing you the whole time you're there?
Yeah, for sure. Like John and I had earlier that winter, we had gone and jumped off the Berlin Wall. So we had gone into East Germany and we were bribing our way through the border and our first real interaction with the East. So we were kind of geared up for that experience. We had brought food because we knew there wasn't food there, all those sort of things. But from the moment we land in Moscow, you're in a different place. They take your passports. Basically, they want to know where you are all the time. And we write about this in the book. At midnight, the first night in Moscow, we get a phone call in our room. Everybody got a phone call in their room in their native tongue. And the voice said, "Are you all right?" And then hung up.
So creepy.
It's so wild. They just basically wanted to make sure we hadn't left the hotel room. And I'm never one to leave my passport, even today. I've fought foreign border people for my passport. So our passports, letting go of them wasn't comfortable.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. And what we didn't really mention is that this is no easy climb that you guys are prepping for either. This mountain's a volcano, 18,500-foot volcano, and more people die on Elbrus than Everest. And why is that?
Isn't that why? It's a crazy stat, right? I
Yeah.
mean, Everest gets all the news, but it's just sitting there in a storm path. And the storms that crash into this part of the mountains and the sea there, it's crazy, right? So the storms that blow into Elbrus are legendary. Kit Delorier had a big storm when she was on her trip. The Warren Miller guys, when they went after us, they hit a big storm. So it's known not as a technical climb, but as a stormy climb. And that's what happened.
Okay. And so there's a lot of strange pieces to the trip. I mean, the first strange piece is that phone call that you got, which is super weird. And then the language barrier is another piece that's evident to everybody, I think, once you get there. I mean, when you guys all first meet together in Paris or when you get together in Moscow, the language barrier is evident, but is it a festive attitude or is it like a somber, we're going to go do something heavy attitude?
Oh, it's like everybody was on vacation. Yeah, they were like, yeah, we're going to Elbrus. And none of us knew what that was, really. Of course, they were partying and having a good time.
And then, like, the locals around there, there's local voodoo that states that Allah doesn't like May Day, which is May 1st. And that's like a thing that they really think about. Do you hear that from the Russians, and do you even think twice about it?
Yeah, the storm was a big one. And the local guides were worried about it. The wind was so ferocious the night before the climb, it blew the door off of the hut. And you also have to remember that, like, the tram that we took to 10,000 feet from the village had no door on it. So, like, there was no maintenance around the lifts. They're running a tram to public with no door on it. And you just get in this tram pretty high off the ground, and there's no door in that tram. So you're questioning everything. Are these lifts safe? Where the heck are we? Of course, there's not a lot of food. It's not plentiful. We're cramped into the shelter, I think about 14,000 feet. The door blows off the hinges. And the guides definitely were talking about this idea that this is a bad one and Allah doesn't like Mayday. Yeah, that was a thing.
And when I think about you and your brother, it doesn't sound like you're always on the same page. And I think that's more personality based. Like you're the money guy in your guys' career of getting all the sponsors, and he's more the soul skier, given you both, love skiing, whatever. But it's like you're two different people. Does John take the Allah stuff more seriously than you? And you're kind of like, I don't believe this astrology shit?
There was a lot going on. And John and I, as much as we love each other, we're really different. And we've been different our whole lives. And it had been a very long winter. At that time in my career, I'm living on the road 10 plus months a year. John's running a construction company, coming and going. We're traveling through Europe with Tom Day and his wife and his 3-year-old baby. He's like, there's tension, and we're all living in a van. So by the time we get to Elbrus, spring of 1990, we're tired. And I'm, of course, just the way I was, like, this is going to be a big event in our careers. We're going to summit one of the 7 summits. I'm going to market the heck out of this thing. And John, is a guy who's a little bit more pragmatic. He has asthma. He's not an endurance athlete. And I don't think he ever really intended the summit. I don't think it was that big a deal to John. If it was right and it felt good, he was probably going to do it. And that rubbed me a little bit because I trust John and I need John. My relationship in the mountain was around John. So the idea that he wasn't going to go or might not go or took it differently than me put us into our sort of spat mode.
And another thing that separates you two is, I guess I'm going to say, the attention to detail. Because while he may look into more of the local customs, you might look into more of the details. Like you're the one that remembered your touring bindings, which are a very important thing on this trip. And when you find out that John didn't bring his, is there any argument? Do you guys get pissed at each other? Or are you just like, that's my brother and we're going to figure this out and we'll share?
Of course I was upset. He didn't pack all his gear and he was kind of like, well, I thought you were going to do it. And I was like, dude, I can't pack all your stuff,
Right.
And in sort of John way, he kind of sloughed it off. So when we were acclimatizing, we were sharing a Securafix, a backcountry plate for our alpine bindings. I had one, he had one. I mean, it was ridiculous. And if you watch the footage, you can see that one foot shuffles and the other heel lifts,
Yeah.
And, we were just getting the cutaways for the film. We didn't want the trip to completely fall apart and come back without something to promote and put on ESPN. And John never really, I don't think, thought all that through either. Like, oh, if we don't have the proper gear, we can't make the proper film. So I got more irritated with that, agitated with that as we got closer to the summit attempt, because I realized he potentially might not go.
But you knew that the whole time. That was like, you were on this trip to summit and he was on the trip to be there and maybe summit?
Yeah, for sure.
So your timeline looks like you guys get to Russia on the 27th of April. You get that creepy call that night. Then the storm starts picking up, and that's when you get on the tram and go up is the next day, the 28th, I believe. But you're at 14,000 feet, and through that storm, 4 feet of snow is dumped on the mountain. And base camp, is it something that's totally existing, or is it something you have to build? How does that kind of operate on a mountain like that?
Well, the refuge was at 14,000 feet, so that basically was base camp. And we had a lot of snow and a lot of wind on the acclimatization days that we were going up and coming back down. And it would have been better if we had gone all the way to the village at 1.2. That would have helped a lot. But we lived up there at 14,000 feet. And then the night of the storm, the night before the summit attempt, the storm was pretty big, but it was mainly like wind, like ferocious. And then there was the clearing. And the day of the summit attempt, that night is when it snowed 5 feet and had winds, even harder winds, over 100 miles an hour. So that storm was like building, and it took a break and then slammed into Elbrus.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start out again with Dragon. As after I announced that they are a sponsor and I mentioned how my sunglasses float, I've received messages about how they float. Because they really do. It's incredible, and I'll never lose another pair of sunglasses again. Thanks to the lower density thermoplastic injection, which makes these things float. Like I said, it's rocket science for your sunglasses. And they also feature LumiLens color optimized lens technology that delivers superior color vividness, improves depth perception, and reduces eye fatigue for better performance. And Dragon is making it easier than ever for you to own a pair of these amazing shades. Head on over to dragonalliance.com, go shopping, and enter the code Powell15. That's all one word with the number 15 and no spaces, and you will save 15% on your entire order. My next sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery, and 10 Barrel does so much for action sports. It's crazy. They sponsor a team of skiers, skaters, and bikers. They sponsor the most important podcasts in the genre. They have their own events. They put out movies. They do everything. But the most important and the greatest thing that they do is their beer, because they have incredible beer. And the newest flavor is by far my favorite. It's a German-inspired Pilsner that is perfect for just about anything. It's light, it's crisp, and I love it so much. So next time you're at the store, please pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel and taste the difference. They also have pubs in Denver, San Diego, Idaho, Portland, and their hometown of Bend. To find out more about 10 Barrel and the pubs, head on over to 10barrel.com. My final sponsor this break is Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. And while everyone can go check out all the deals over at peterglenn.com, Peter Glenn is so much more than just a website. For over 60 years, Peter Glenn has been getting people out there. Whether you're at one of their East Coast stores or online, you aren't just another transaction to Peter Glenn. You're part of the family. I've worked with a lot of retailers over the years, and that's what separates Peter Glenn from the rest. They care about earning your business, they have a true no-hassle return policy, and they have all the products, all the brands, and the best deals. So please check out Peter Glenn when you're buying all of your outdoor gear. That's round one of sponsors for me. Now let's jump back into the podcast. And it seems like with a lot of these trips, the way you acclimate, it's usually longer than 2 or 3 days, it seems like, but your window is a lot shorter than most. Why was that?
I think because of the promotional aspect of the trip. It was set up for these winners to get in and out. And without communicating it, I don't think they ever thought the winners would get to the top of Elbrus. That's where everybody's goals were different. We were super serious about it, or definitely I was. I don't think the Chamonix guides were. They didn't want to deal with it. They didn't want to deal with the contest winners at that altitude. So I think that's really where the wheels came off the bus. They never said, hey, we're going just because it's a cool place. Don't worry about summiting,
Right.
And of course, for the brand and everything that I had planned for the coming fall of 1990 with my tour and the film coming out, this was going to be part of our story of the year.
And it sounds like from how it was evolving, you wake up that day after the storm and it's clear, and crews were kind of broken up on the climb, it sounds like, because there's 23 of you. But when you're working your way up, it sounds like it's Tom Day, John, and a contest winner named Alfred ended up kind of being with your crew. And it gets to a point where John and Tom aren't feeling it. What was going through their minds? They just had a bad premonition?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't until like 5:30 a.m. that they said, okay, we'll go for the summit. We went to sleep thinking we weren't going to go.
Okay.
We wake up and go, oh, they're going to go. So the minute they announced it, people started leaving the refuge, just streaming out the door. People were getting ready at different pacing. And John, I, and Tom, we had cameras, film. We had to get organized. And in that process, John and Tom basically say they're not going. So they say that morning they're not going for the summit.
Oh, so you knew that before you even left the refuge that morning?
I did, yeah. I was pissed, I was really pissed because John hadn't, up until that point, hadn't said he was definitely not going. And he pointed to the weather and he pointed to this and that. But of course, in my head, I'm just thinking, you don't have your gear. You're not ready. And really what I was pissed about is I wanted to be with him. Like this is something I had thought about doing with him. So to go alone was irritating. So what happened is I took off that morning with a French journalist, and he's an amazing mountaineer. And he looked at me and said, he was a diesel engine and I was a F1. He said, don't sprint too much. Don't waste your energy. That was really wise because that journalist Not only did he summit in the storm, he summited the higher of the two peaks and found the refuge in the storm. Nobody found the refuge in the storm, but he found the refuge in the storm. And he's the one who eventually made it all the way down to the village to tell John that nobody knew where we were. But I couldn't keep up with him. So I probably lost him, say we left the refuge at 7 a.m., really by 11, 12 in the afternoon. I don't know. He's too far in front of me. I couldn't keep up.
What happens to like stick with your partner and shit like that? Does that, I guess, not exist at that point?
Yeah, I mean, every man for themselves, and I think when climbing, a lot of people just think, I've got this much energy for me and I don't have it for the guy I don't really know or where he's at. And so we had a 2:00 turnaround time. That should be said. It was stated from the Chamonix guides to have a 2:00 turnaround time. I didn't do that. I wasn't watching the time, but I never really intended to turn around. I was going to summit. I was young and that's what I was going to do.
Yeah, you're like a cocky 26-year-old who's not going to be stopped by anything. Not his brother, not the guides, nobody.
Yeah, I was going. I mean, and my 26-year-old self would always make that decision, I think. That's the truth of it. So what happened was the lead guide, he was probably 150 feet below me, not even, when he turned around. And he didn't say a word to me. He just turned around. He didn't say, hey, dude, it's 2:00, it's turnaround time. He didn't try to reach out to me. We had been in conversation, so I knew he could have said something. I turned around and he was gone. And then the banker from Spain, Alfred, he didn't turn around either. So the two of us started climbing together. He was a young guy and he was fit. He had never been to altitude before. He had won the trip by buying a beanie. He had bought a hat, but he was up for it. He had the gear and away we went. Yeah, the weather was getting bad, but the two of us were going to the top. And sometime around 4:30, I don't know, we got near the saddle. We were exhausted. So we decided to take our packs off. Total rookie move.
This is like the catastrophic decision number one.
Number one, like those packs were heavy, but everything we needed was in there. Clothing, food, down bag, down jackets, and my skis. I leave the pack, I take my crampons and my ice axe, and we go for it. And the storm's getting bad. And on the way down to the summit, we're going up. On the way down was the lawyer from Degree 7. He had summited. And all he said to us was, you're close, keep going. And we kept going. We eventually made it to the top in a total blizzard.
And this thing comes up from below, so it's like you're never looking back down the mountain when you're climbing up, so you don't even realize something's coming from below to come swallow you up almost.
Yeah, it definitely came up from the valley. It was obvious that there was a storm, but, in my mind, I'm thinking, I only have to go 4,000 feet to hit that refuge. If I put my skis on, I'm there.
Yeah.
That was my plan. Like, I'm going to strap on my skis and I'm out of here. Nobody's going to catch me. I'm going to get there pretty quick. But then we never found our packs.
With this decision-making and to leave your packs and things that I've read, you hear about being at altitude and brain cells are popping because of the lack of oxygen in there. At least that's what I imagine it like. Do you find yourself not really being able to think clearly when you're at that altitude, or does it not hit you at that high?
Yeah, I think it's really, sort of logic, and you're thinking in best case scenario. You're not always thinking in the worst case scenario. Today, when I guide, I think in the worst case scenario because I'm responsible for the people, right?
Yep.
But then at that time, I was thinking about, I'm going to summit and I'm going to find my skis. I'm going to find my pack. There was no reason why I wouldn't. So that's really something. You're not thinking as logical as you are in your day-to-day life. So I think, although that was a catastrophic move, not bringing the skis, at the time, it's more logical, like I'm losing the weight.
Yeah, this is going to make it easier for me to go 150 feet. I'll be back here, put on the pack, and then I'll ski down. It'll be easy.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's not the case. You're up there celebrating on the summit, and there's a giant Russian, Sasha, who sees you, and he must look at you guys like you guys are complete idiots. Do you know this guy, or do you just understand that he knows more about the mountain than you guys?
Yeah, I mean, he approaches us, and he's like, what are you guys doing up here? Like, look around. He spoke like broken English. You would think somebody'd be excited to see you on the summit. There'd be some sort of connection. His was like, you guys are crazy. you know? And at the moment, I don't know him or recognize him. In hindsight, there's more to that story. But what he's told us in the moment was that he was the lead guide for the Italian expedition and he had lost the whole expedition, which is a crazy that this guy who turns out to be like a superhuman lost the whole expedition. Like that didn't add up.
Right.
But of course, you're not connecting that dot. So he says, come, we're clearing the mountain. We said, you know, our packs are over there. And he just basically said, find your packs or live. I'm leaving. And we went with him.
And I can imagine that being a hard decision to just blindly follow him. But at that point, you probably get that it's important. So Sasha brings you to a group of Russians on the mountain. They also have the Degree 7 member, that lawyer, Michelle. And is it pretty much following the Russians through the storm blindly?
Yeah, at that point, you know, they had gathered everybody up in the saddle. And in my mind, I thought we were going to walk by our packs. I'm like, oh, we're just going to pick our packs up on the way out of here. I'm still hopeful that our packs are going to be found. And quite honestly, there's got to be some Russians sporting the newest, you know, North Face down bags and jackets and like backpack. Whoever found that backpack won the lottery, you know?
Right, yeah.
So it wouldn't have surprised me if somebody did or eventually find that pack, but we never did. And the Russians, they have radios. They're communicating with somebody. The path was marked with these small, like, dig safe flags. And I'm still thinking we're going to get down. The problem was the wind. To follow that path, we had to go head on into the wind. And the wind was blowing over 100 miles an hour.
Jesus.
And it's a very subtle thing. But when you walk into a wind that harsh, you start to turn your back to it slowly. And so the whole group would just veer off following each other. And all of a sudden we'd realize we're going in the wrong direction and we'd straighten out. And then, of course, over time, we'd veer off. And we couldn't find the flags anymore. The Russians were on the radio, and you could tell with the urgency of their voices that the conversation was confused, that they were lost. They didn't want to admit it. And they were arguing with whoever was on the other end where they were and what they couldn't find. And that was pretty evident we were lost.
So at that point, you're lost. Eventually, everybody just starts digging into the mountain. They realize that you're spending the night on the mountain. You've got to dig holes. And without communicating with anybody, you take it upon yourself to dig a hole for you, Michelle, and Alfred. And they don't help at all. And when you finish, they're gone. And at that point, is it like, fuck it, it's all about you and you can't worry about anybody else?
Yeah, you know, Michelle said to me while I was digging that he was a rich man who didn't dig ditches. And I remember looking at him like, you know, I can't say what I was thinking. I was just like, whatever, like, I'm digging, you know?
Yeah.
And Alfred was freezing to death. He was laying in snow. He couldn't help. He did try, but he really couldn't help. It was agonizing to watch him try because the urgency wasn't there and he was freezing to death. So I went into full on, you know, get it done mode and started digging like crazy. You know, the thing that triggered the snow cave digging was a crevasse rescue. When we were lost, I was checking my footing for snow bridges and I had jumped over a crevasse and the guy right behind me didn't jump and he fell into the crevasse. So Sasha and I rescued that guy and that put shock through the whole group. And once we got everybody safely over the crevasse, that triggered, oh, we need to settle in for the night. And the Russians made it very, very clear that we were on our own. We weren't part of them and physically pushed me away from their caves. So with that in mind, I was digging a cave big enough for 3 people. And Michelle never came to me and said, hey, I found another cave to go into. And I'm taking Alfred, the kid who's freezing to death. He just took Alfred and I was digging. I didn't know. I was in the cave, out of the cave, and they were gone. And that sounds like a weird thing, but in a storm, in the heat of the moment, it was a thing. And, you know, I remember thinking, oh, I built a good cave. I'm proud of my cave. It's big enough for 3 people. It took hours. I was kicking it with my boots and hitting it with my ice axe and using my hands. And then there's nobody there. And I basically settled into that cave going, I don't know what's next. I really don't. I had no more energy. I had no food. I hadn't eaten or drank anything since basically 6 a.m. It's well into the evening. I'm sweating from the inside out. I'm freezing. And I started to sort of like loosen my boots and do what I could to get my extremities back warm again. And the wind was so hard, it was snowing so much. The entrance to my cave was snowed in. It didn't take long.
Do you pretty much feel like this is it? You're kind of in and out of hallucinations of like, I'm going to die here tonight, and unfortunately, this is how I'll go?
It definitely was on my mind that this could be it. There's no doubt about it. I was definitely in that mindset where I don't know what's going to happen here. And I was fading in and out. And I was vomiting blood. I wasn't thinking clearly. And eventually I had hallucinations. I believe I met my guardian angels that night. It was my white light experience. My guardian angels were telling me to follow them. And I kept resisting. And then I would wake up and I would be hacking. And I had another hallucination where a bunch of people brought me like Twinkies and stuff from 7-Eleven. And, I was kind of like just having these weird dreams and visions. And in the middle of all that, Sasha came into my cave. He literally just like kicked through the entrance and appeared. It was wild.
He holds on to you all night and you guys share warmth and you guys make it until the morning. When you wake up, had the weather broken or is it still nasty out?
No, it's still nasty. I mean, that storm was still full on. Sasha found me because I left my ice axe outside the cave. And that's where he knew the cave was. And the next day, when people came out of the snow caves, it was a little less windy at the time, so I could see where people were. And I could tell some of the Russians had water. So I went to see if I could get my water bottle filled, and they took my water bottle and threw it down a cave, and then it came back up empty.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of love going on there. And then Michelle came out of a cave, and he said to me, he was surprised to see me alive. He said I didn't dig a very nice, good cave.
What a jerk. So you have to be pissed at everyone at this point. Like, you're there, but your blood has to be boiling, but you still have to make it. I mean, Sasha's your only refuge and someone that you can trust, and maybe Alfred as well. But then it's back to hiking with the Russians and trying to find your way, and it's back to falling in crevasses, and people are getting hurt this time. And I think this is eventually where you get fed up with the whole group, and like, you're done helping. Whoever fell, whatever, I'm not helping them out. Is that when you gave up on the group, when they wouldn't help share anything with you or do anything for you? You're like, fuck them, let them die, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I'd been involved with every crevasse rescue there was. Sasha and I had taken the lead on that and setting up the belays and the rope and all that. And nobody was really helping. And when this one guy fell in, he broke his leg, and Sasha was in the hole. Trying to pull him out was a nightmare because the rope was sawing into the snow bridge and would pull the guy up. He would hit his head on the snow bridge. And I was like, I'm out of here. This whole thing could let go. I'm not doing this. And the group, they kind of didn't like Michelle either. And they forced him to go out to the edge with a ski pole and hold it over to bridge the rope, to run the rope over it. And I wanted nothing to do with all that group dynamics. I just went to the back. And when we got the guy out with the broken leg, it was a mess trying to create a sled for him on a sleeping pad. And they didn't like my ideas. They wanted to do it their way, and their way was a disaster. And it just created this situation where I was going to go off on my own.
So then, yeah, you're planning on going off on your own, and Sasha tries to talk some sense into you, but you're not having it. And for some reason, he decides he's going to join you on the way down, along with one of the injured who had fallen in a crevasse and ruined his face, and then the other Degree 7 guys. But before you can even go, Sasha sends you to steal rope from the Russians, and it sounds like there was a one-sided fight there. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't figure out why Sasha didn't want to get the rope himself. And the thing about this rope is every time we had used it for a crevasse rescue, like, they never coiled the rope. The rope was always covered with snow, and it was always tangled. And the other Russians kind of carried the rope. We never roped up in the crevasse field, which was crazy.
Yeah.
And Sasha wanted me to go get the rope. And I said, you get the rope. And he said, get the rope. And, I was not going to argue. I just went for the rope. I wanted to get the hell out of there. So I went and picked up the rope and started coiling the rope. And as I was doing that, these Russians sort of gathered around me, and one of them pulled a knife. And the minute I saw it, I just slugged the guy. And we wrestled, and I got the knife. And then I took the knife and I cut the rope in half and gave him half the rope. I was a madman. I mean, they didn't know who the Irish kid was with the knife, you know?
Right, yeah. This crazy American let him have a piece of our rope. Get him out of here.
Yeah. So, that's how I got the rope. And Sasha, I was kind of figuring it'd be like, that was impressed. He was like, okay, we can go now. I was like, okay, we go. Yeah, that was really intense, and they were going to spend another night up there. They had the guy with the broken leg. We had the guy with the broken face. We had Sasha. We had Michelle, Alfred, and away we went.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and Stanley is a brand that I trust. I like the people who work there, and I've always been a big fan of their products. They've been around since 1913, and they invented the keep things hot and cold categories. It's that green bottle that your grandpa took everywhere that he possibly went. That's Stanley. And unlike these new copycat brands, Stanley has stayed true to itself, not jacking up their prices like everyone else that markets themselves as an outdoor adventure brand. Stanley is the original. And because they love my show and you, my listeners, they're offering the best deal you're going to find anywhere from Stanley right here. You're going to get 30% off all things Stanley. I highly recommend picking up a set of the pint glasses as I use them on a daily basis. To get the deal, what you need to do is head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping. At checkout, you're going to enter the code DRINKFAST. That's all one word, and you'll get the deal. If you spend over $100, I'll send you a Powell Movement beanie on top of that. In keeping with the theme of original, my next sponsor, Rollerblade, pretty much invented inline skating. And based on all of us being stuck inside for way too long over this pandemic, getting outside and getting in shape and having fun should be the priority. And that's what Rollerblade is best at. They make the most comfortable, high-performance skates on the market that you can use for training, transportation, or preparing for ski season. And ski season is so close that now's the time to download Rollerblade's award-winning Skate to Ski app. It will put you on the path to having your best ski season ever. You can download the Skate to Ski app on the App Store and find out everything else about Rollerblade over at rollerblade.com. My final sponsor is Alpine Vans. And in this day and age of having a mobile adventure unit, from start to finish, no one makes the van building process easier, more fun, and most importantly, better than the rest. Well, I could go on about the beauty of their builds. You can check out the 15-minute look at Cody Townsend's van that he created for the 50 project with Alpine Vans and get an idea of what paying attention to every single detail means. Cody's rig is a functional thing of beauty that looks as good as it performs. And Alpine Vans is your one-stop shop to make the van of your dreams a reality. They have the designers and fabricators who all have degrees, but have also lived the life. Think ski patrollers who open and close resorts and live in the lots. Mountain bikers who will spend weeks upon end in their vehicle, using that as their mobile adventure unit. These guys have lived it, they understand it, and that experience is what makes them the best. And right now, while other people are scrambling to find vehicles because of the technology shortage, Alpine has 8 Mercedes Sprinters ready to go. You can have your Dreammobile in your driveway in 90 days. So head on over to alpinevans.com to start your build today. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. It doesn't sound like there was too many incidents along the route down. Sasha gets you guys to a certain point, and then he's like, hey, I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to go back up in the morning and help the rest of the crew. You guys, you're 5 kilometers from where the hotel is. You guys take it from here, and that's when kind of everyone breaks up. And when I say that, it's like you just haul ass because you don't want to be around anybody else and sprint your way back to the hotel. And you put together a few coincidences later on in life about Sasha, like that there was something going on with him. Like he wasn't part of that Russian crew because they weren't giving him water or doing anything like that or giving him rope. Did you ever figure out who Sasha was?
Yeah, it was really funky. In hindsight, I remember him lurking around our group, watching our group from Moscow down to Georgia, down to the hotel, and then he was on the summit. That's really bizarre. It doesn't make sense that he lost the entire Italian expedition. He was an animal on the mountain.
Okay.
So later that summer, my dad was a doctor. He got a new patient from Russia. And my dad came home. I was living at the house, making my movies and stuff. And he's like, I had a really interesting visit today from a Russian patient. And we talked about your trip and all this stuff. And she was asking me all these questions. And one of the questions was, what did Sasha look like? And I had always described Sasha as a big, huge guy with blonde hair and blue eyes. And he was the only Russian with blonde hair and blue eyes. The others were really dark-skinned, ethnic Georgians. And this patient, or supposed patient of my dad, just casually said, "Oh, he was probably KGB."
Huh.
And so my dad tells me the story, and I'm like, "Well, let's call that lady. I want to talk to that lady." And that lady gave a false name, false phone number, her records. Again, no computers at the time, no internet. Couldn't get a hold of her.
Gives me the chills thinking about it. That's crazy.
Yeah. And with the context of the Cold War and the context of Americans and Europeans traveling in Russia, USSR at the time, it's conceivable that somebody was assigned to that group. The fact that no Americans died on that trip was one of the reasons why nobody ever heard of that trip. We couldn't get any press when we were back in the States on the trip. Claudio Abate, who passed away from our trip, he was a journalist, and there was a lot of press around his passing and loss in Italy and France, but that story didn't resonate here.
How many people died on the mountain from that trip?
It's a number that's never been finalized, like secure. In the book, we say 15.
Okay.
I don't want to exaggerate. We counted in all press counts that we went back and looked at, adding up who was lost and all those things. 15 seems to be the number. It was higher in my mind. I always remembered a number much higher than that.
Right.
But who's to say at this point? And one life would have been too many. Claudio Abate, he was alone in a snow cave like me, and he froze to death. When they found him, when the storm ended a day and a half, 2 days later, they found his hand sticking out of his snow cave. And he was still alive when they found him, but there was no helicopter, and they were collecting bodies, and they put Claudio on the sled that they were dragging down the mountain with the dead bodies.
Oh, man.
And he died on that sled.
Huh.
And when I think about that, it's weird being a survivor, right? People don't believe you, or, yeah, you had the white light, right? Oh, there was a KGB, these things, they think I'm crazy. But when you break it down, that this guy died in a cave and I was alone in the cave, like, it's not a big step to realize you can die in a snow cave, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's always been weird for me about this trip was, hey, you didn't die. You're all right. What's wrong? Why are you all hung up on this? And that's basically kept me quiet about this story for 30 years.
I mean, it is such an interesting and scary and real tale. To me, reading it, everybody knows that they're signing up for risk when they go on one of these trips. But the shitty part for you was that you're with groups that aren't going to help you. Like the every man for themselves thing, I get that. But like not sharing water and not giving any common courtesies to another human who needs to live is the frustrating part, I would think, is like, fuck these guys. Sorry for my language, but like they will do nothing for me. And eventually that's when you're like, hey, I'm going to do nothing for them. And then to add to the whole misery, when you need to get out of the country, you've got Michel, who's this scumbag lawyer from France, who's really smart, and he's able to lie his way out of Russia and get you guys out of Russia because they're not going to let you leave. And he's promising all these hospitals, and my brother's a doctor who specializes in high altitude. But really, he was just lying to get himself out of the country and back with his family. And you get to France with no medical care or anything, and they don't work on weekends in France. And you get there on a Friday, so you're pretty much screwed for 3 days, and you've got to wait for your brother and everybody to get to France. So everything's kind of screwed, and, eventually you get back to the States and everything's fine in life, but you've got to live with all these things that kind of go through your head from this thing of being the survivor. Because like you say, I mean, there's survivor's guilt. There's things that's going to change your life forever. I think this probably makes you drink a little bit more at first, and then spawns your sobriety is just the whole chaos of the trip.
Yeah, it's true. It was like the trip that wouldn't end, That's what it felt like. The frustration of being dumped at the hospital by Michel was overwhelming for me. They had to restrain me there.
You broke a bottle and almost like threatened to kill him, right?
I did. Yeah, he showed up the next day with his kid, and he started telling him he saved our lives and everything. And I broke a Coke bottle and went after him for his money. I needed his French francs, just relying on those Boston skills. I went after him, and it just was a trip that didn't end. And part of that was not being able to talk about it. not having anybody, because it was my profession and I'm supposed to be the guy who knows the way home in the storm, the guy who's leading, it was hard to talk about. And when we toured with that, at the time I was producing a slideshow and I did a whole part on Elbrus. During the presentations that I would do at the Dallas Ski Show, Boston Ski Show, Denver, all over the country, literally people came up during the narration and would hug me. Like, it was that moving.
Yeah.
And that was sort of my healing, was being able to talk about it in that format. And that's kind of how I processed that trip.
Well, I'm glad that you are still here. It was a very scary and crazy trip, and it paved the way for your Hall of Fame ski career, and that's going to be the next thing I talk about, so it's nice that I can just kind of segue into the Hall of Fame after that terrible experience. But the Hall of Fame's amazing. It's where you and your brother belong. Why did it take them so long for you to get in?
Well, I think that, the process of the Hall is not clear, I think, for a lot of people on how it works. And over the years, the Hall was run by the U.S. ski team. So, it was gold medal of country, right? And sort of World Cuppers. And I think over the years, the last decade or so, the Hall's really shifted its focus and started welcoming freestylers and snowboarders, Doug Coombs, Glenn Plake, Schmidt. And I think it's a process. And the other piece of that is somebody has to nominate people to get in. So I'm a big fan of people getting nominated and that process. But for us, I don't know. It was an interesting process. And now that I'm involved with the Hall, I'm a big fan of it. I think what they're preserving for the industry is amazing.
Well, I look at it as you definitely should have gotten in earlier. But I also look at it as the Hall really doesn't have their finger on the pulse of the sport. And it's super easy for me to paint a picture to you of why. Because it is very easy to look at the Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame and realize that not one snowboarder is getting in this year or is nominated this year, and that makes it a joke. Like, if I'm the Snowboard Hall of Fame and I'm not putting in a snowboarder, and I don't mean to I get kind of angry when I think about this, but it's like right. They have not one snowboarder in there. And if you look at it this year, I don't want to say they have no clue, but it's like the categories for the Hall of Fame to me. It's like there's 6 athletes that are up for being in the Hall of Fame this year, and those are all skiers. 4 of those will get in. There are 5 people up for the heritage category entrance, 1 will get in. And then there's 6 people up for the builder category, and 3 will get in. And I look at it like, that is so confusing to me. Why don't they have 5 skiers that get nominated, 3 get in, 5 snowboarders that get nominated, 3 get in, and then 1 person who has done a lot for the sport to get in? Because I look at all these things as like, when you look at like the heritage, I'm going to look at it this year. Sorry, I'm just diarrhea of the mouth here, but I think about this. I'm like one of the only people that think about this under 40. And I'm not under 40, but I mean, one of the only people that think about it. Whatever. It doesn't matter. But if you look at the nomination of Chuck and Jan, and I forget their last name, but they are in the nomination for being ski historians who have the oldest ski shop in the country. Only they don't have the oldest ski shop in the country. They have the oldest ski shop in the same building in the country. But Peter Glenn, my sponsor, has been around longer than them. LaHoots has been around like 50 to 70 years longer than them. And it's like one thing that they've done to help the ski industry that they say in their bio is that they've donated their time and money to the Hall of Fame. So that's kind of my problem with the Hall, is like people like that should never even be nominated. I mean, like, do you personally feel like people that own ski shops and have done historian type stuff should be in the Hall of Fame that celebrates you for doing the stuff you did?
Well, we should tell your viewers, of course, I'm now the MC of the Hall, right?
Yes. Once you got in, they wanted you to be the face of it.
Yeah. So seeing that, the process of that, I've come to sort of appreciate these builders and the historians because they go before us. And everybody plays a role here, not just athletes. You bring up a good point with the snowboarders. I agree. The snowboarders are underrepresented. There's no doubt about it. But Jake's in, and Ross Powers is in, and Seth Westcott's in.
That's like me saying I have a black friend. I'm not racist.
No, I get it. Like, we need more, right? There's no doubt about it. Of course, the Brotherhood of Skiing is just the first African Americans are going in, right? We're slow. We're behind the times.
I agree that they got in, and I think it's awesome they got in, but it's not Hall of Fame credentials. I mean, that was kind of what's going on in the world today, and the Hall of Fame's like, well, shit, we got to get more diverse too.
Yeah, I mean, just in their defense, you could say that across all industries.
For sure.
But, when you look at John Eves should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
He's on the ballot. Jan Reynolds, she's amazing.
Terry J. Hawkinson's more important to snowboarding than she is to skiing. And Terry J. Hawkinson's not in the Hall of Fame. So,
But has he been nominated, or did you nominate him? I don't know.
but that's the thing, is like the nomination part is something that takes hours and hours and hours to do. And people aren't nominating people, so you're not getting a representative field of who really deserves to be in these Hall of Fames. But this is the process that the Hall of Fame has. I feel like it needs to change. I mean, when nominations are given too, I mean, you can put the nominations in, but then from what I gather, the people that vote, and I can read their list here, is U.S. Ski and Snowboard, Cross Country Ski Areas Association, which shouldn't be voting on the Alpine stuff, the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame, which is all people made of like over 60, except for the one social media guy they have. The United States Olympics. I don't even know what that means. I'd like to see who votes from there. Sports Specialist, LTD. That's like retail people, I think. Regional museums, National Ski Patrol. They say the media, but I've never been contacted about voting, and I'm a part of the media nowadays. And when I was with a brand, I'd never heard of anybody being contacted to vote. The X Games. It's kind of like a boys club that I feel like is a smokescreen of how to get in, because every year you look at it, it's a whole bunch of freestylers, and I believe a lot of those guys should be in the Hall of Fame. They probably should have been in a long time ago. But to make this thing modern and to make this thing right, I mean, there's so many people that need to be in the Hall of Fame that aren't. And no, I can say I haven't nominated them. I nominated someone this year who didn't get in, or I was part of like a letter, because you have to have nominations and letters and recommendations. And it's like, you know what? People who work and people who are busy aren't going to spend all their time trying to nominate these people that might not even happen.
I mean, you're hitting on it. You know, it's a process, and it's not a perfect process. And I think all of us would say that.
But other Hall of Fames nail it. Like, there's not one other Hall of Fame where people are like, this is awful. And I look at this as awful. I mean, like, the fact that you got in 20 years later almost than when you could have gotten in is crazy to me. It's just wild. I mean, Plake, when did he get in like 2012? I mean, Glenn Plake, the most famous skier on the planet. If you were to say the guy with the mohawk, a lot of people know who Glenn Plake is.
He's the man.
And
Absolutely.
It took them that long to put him in. And then some people, they just wait till they die and then they realize, oh shit, we should have put him in. We'll get him in next year. And I don't know if people are nominating then. I don't know if people waited like, oh, McConkey died this year, let's nominate him. I don't know how that happened, but he got in really quick.
Yeah, it is not perfect. In their defense, you know, a lot always boils down to money. And it's really a one-man band up there in Ishpeming. Justin's doing all he can do. He's an amazing guy. I'm excited you're going to join us in Sun Valley for the induction this year. And all of this discussion makes the hall a better place. You know, the one thing about it, and I've said this at a lot of levels, X Game athletes, extreme athletes, even racers, like there's no fraternity, there's no union for us. There's nobody standing up for us, you know, whether it's going to be concussions, any major issue. Like the only voice right now in this winter sports world, which is unified, is climate change, you know, and rightfully so. But when you look down, there's other issues. Athletes, we have issues. You talked about Roy at High Fives. I mean, he's trying to represent people who are getting hurt, you know, so like it's a big push. And, you know, had we been professional football players, baseball players, soccer, you know, we would have had some sort of organization to help with this. And the ski industry is more organized than most other industries. You know, sailing is my other specialty. And let me tell you what, the Sailing Hall of Fame is not as organized as the Ski Hall of Fame at all. Like tennis is organized, swimming's organized, but those are established funding mechanisms for these halls. I will tell you, I found myself oddly watching the Football Hall of Fame inductions just this past weekend. I must have been super bored. But anyways, Peyton Manning gave a great speech. And when you think about the hall and all the people that deserve to be in, and you go to these inductions and you hear these stories, and this is true at our inductions at the Hall of Fame, you realize that at the moment, this is something special.
For the athletes when they're speaking, and you can hear, because I've been to a few different inductions.
Yeah, you can hear it. I mean, Andrew Weibrecht, when he walked onto the stage that night in Park City, and he just said, you know, I thought my ski career was over until this happened. And he was in the moment, and he was so sincere with that. And what an amazing guy, what an amazing, understated, humble athlete. You know, you really see why it's special and why we need it. So we need to fight for it. We need to make it better. And it's not a perfect process, but you're an important voice, Mike. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I think this sort of conversation makes it better. So Yeah, I think the process is out there. The application's online. It is not complicated, but time consuming because we want to make sure the applications get right. The other thing people don't realize, like a lot of people are nominated every year. The number's pretty big. So it's not easy to get to the ballot. And once you do make it to the ballot, if you look at the ballot, Alan Schoenberger, there's people on that ballot that have been there for a few years. So you're not a shoo-in.
No, but I think the people voting on the ballot are the problems, I guess, because if there's a ton of people that aren't getting in, I'm sure there's people that really deserve to be in the hall that aren't getting the friendship card played or the, hey, I skied with this guy card played, because I just don't know anyone in my life ever really who has had a voice other than yourself, but you're like the face of this thing that really has a voice and a vote in the Ski Hall of Fame. I've never met anyone. I've been in the ski industry for a long time, and I've talked about this, and I've supported the Hall of Fame and done a lot of things, but I've always had a problem with it, and I'm excited that I can be at the Sun Valley event and hopefully sit down and have some conversations with people that hopefully can at least spawn some new ideas to make this better, because like you said, it is super important. It's something that never should ever go away. It just needs to be right. It needs to be accurate. It needs to speak to who the sport is. And I guarantee you, if you get the modern people in that, if there's a Hall of Fame ballot that has Tanner Hall, Simon Dumont, Tara J. Hawkinson, Todd Richards, you know what's going to happen?
Absolutely.
People are going to care about it, because every name on there that I read right now, I know a couple of them because I've read a bunch of books by Barrymore and yourself, but most people don't. And that's the problem, I think, with the Hall. Like, Simon Dumont.
Amazing.
He's a shoo-in, right? He should be a shoo-in.
Absolutely.
Why is he not in the Hall of Fame? He's done skiing.
Let's get him nominated. I mean, let's get on, because this is the thing, because you're a content creator and an excellent one.
Thank you.
And like myself, we're looking for stories. We're in touch with these people. We know their stories, right? And the world knows their stories. And, when I look at your lineup every podcast, I'm like, man, your list is unbelievable. Like the athletes you're bringing out and the accomplishments you're bringing forward, that's amazing. And I know that's not easy. I mean, you're working hard at that, and it's your world. I mean, some of these people better than I do. So when I look at the list, I'm like, your list, I'm like, wow, this is cool, right? I'm tuning in because I didn't know the guy was also a professional skateboarder or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So, it's important stuff. And the one thing to know is that the nominations don't come from the hall. That's not happening from the executive director's level.
They don't have time.
Yeah, they don't have time. The board is often organizing and helping bring people together, but with the best of intentions, nobody, and I've found this to be true because I've been on both sides of this, it's not sort of quote unquote a boys club. It's not a closed system. Everybody wants to make it better. And I think they're all trying to do that. That's for sure.
Well, let's set some meetings up in Sun Valley and make a couple things happen. But let's not talk about the hall right now. We're going to talk about someone that's come up a couple times in the podcast. It's time for inappropriate questions. And I was just at the very disappointing outdoor retailer trade show with Roy Tuscany, and we shared a hotel room. So it was not disappointing because I got to spend a ton of time with Roy. And I love that guy. I know you love that guy as well. And you are one of his idols growing up. I mean, he loves you and he loves your brother. And I asked Roy to come up with 3 inappropriate questions. Roy had no problems doing it. And I'm going to jump into question number 1 from Roy right now.
Question number 1. Dan, you have a list of famous brothers. Are you Eskimo brothers with any of them?
Do you know what that means?
I don't know that I do.
Okay, because I didn't know what that meant either. And then I was like, Roy, what does Eskimo brothers mean? And he's like, what, Mike? You don't know? And then I thought of my Canadian friend, Sean Pettit, who once told me about something called tunnel buddies. And that might paint the picture a little bit more, but I guess it's like, have you guys had the same girlfriend, but even deeper than that per se? So that's what he's asking. Have you had any brothers where maybe John dated her first, but then you dated her second?
Well, that's interesting. My younger brother, Ned, his high school prom date became John's first wife.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's some interesting family knowledge. But beyond that, I'm not too clear on that. I know that when we were in the Arctic, in an igloo, one of our pro skiers, not to be mentioned, did hook up with a local. And there's not a lot of room in that igloo, I'll tell you that.
Well, that's one to check off the list right there. That's pretty amazing. I wish you would have done that as well. But to think about something to check off the list, Roy's second question is going to be a good one. And here we go.
Question number 2. Yourself and many of my heroes were members of the X team that went around and taught clinics around the country. Obviously, you guys were extreme on the hill. What was the most X-rated thing done off the hill?
Oh, it's true. I mean, the most X-rated thing done off the hill, I mean, that list is pretty long. uh, and depending on the country we were in, gets extended as well. But I would just say, the X team, I always describe us as we were and lived like a rock band. We were young kids, best friends. We traveled together. We skied together. We partied hard together. We got into all sorts of trouble. We bailed each other out all the time. And as we aged, we just became like this group of associates more than friends. It was strange. We all, as we grew with our lives and matured, we still came together for some of the best camps on earth, but we were traveling and staying separate. So to me, it's always a little bit of a mixed emotions because we were so tight in the beginning and then just grew up through the process. But we did a lot of extreme things, and read the book to find the real stories there.
Yeah, the book is phenomenal. Everybody should read the book. I'm going to go with my final inappropriate question from Roy. Not so inappropriate, but definitely worthy.
Question number 3, the grand finale of them all. To be honest, Dan, I just want to know, what is your raddest Warren Miller memory? Because Warren's just a legend, and you probably have some of the best. So it's not inappropriate. It's more, what is your best Warren story?
I love it. Warren himself, was amazing. And one of the things that Warren was so good at was paying attention to people. And we were at the Seattle ski show, the premiere of the movie in Seattle. And it was a press event. And the press were paying all the attention to Warren. I was just standing there in the corner. Nobody was talking to me. And all the press was around Warren, and it was coming to the end of him owning his company. And there was a lot of stories flying around. And when Warren was done talking to the press, he just looked at them all. He said, "You guys missed the best story in the room. And now I'm taking them to dinner." And we just walked out. And that was a great Warren moment. As far as a filming moment, Kevin Andrews, amazing skier, an amazing guy. We were in Portillo, Chile, 1989. And we, of course, were partying as the rock stars that we were in the Hotel Portillo. And we had been bragging about the run we were going to do the next day. And it was, as you look at the resort on the far right, across the road, it was this big open face that comes down over the train track. And we had sort of, loose lips, said that we were going to go do it. So by the time we got the crew together and we were heading over there to do it, there were tracks in it the next day. And they made some beautiful tracks. And then the shot is Kevin and I making powder 8s. We did 75 powder 8 turns above the train trestle and then jump off the train trestle and land in powder 8s. And that night we were in the bar, and of course the guys came up to us. They were like, "Dude, nice tracks, but not first." And we just bought those guys drinks all night. That was awesome.
Oh, it's amazing. Well, it's always an honor to have you on the show. I mean, just your history in ski is incredible, but just the tale that you told about Elbrus, man, it's such a heavy thing. I'm happy you were able to live through it. I know you're happy you were able to live through it. And we'll have to connect again. We'll probably do it in Sun Valley, and we'll tell some other stories. And I'm going to try to get your brother on as well. But he's a tougher one to get on than you because you guys are different guys. And where you're stoked to be on, your brother, I think, is hiding from me. And I understand that. But one day, man. And thanks again for your time.
Track him down. He would be amazing. Hey, thanks so much, man. Pleasure. Honor.
So that was time with Dan Egan, one of the true legends and pioneers in skiing. And his full story is Business 101 on being an athlete entrepreneur. But this story is kind of a 101 course of willing yourself to survive when you're a 26-year-old who makes bad decisions and doesn't listen to his older brother. But the good news is that Dan lived to tell the story of doing whatever it took to stay alive. And I guess the moral of the story is that in those moments where you see the white light and the light offers you 7-Eleven, Twinkies, and other stuff, don't take it. I should also mention that while I was talking about the Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame with Dan, and I mentioned that Terje should be in, I'm an idiot. Not only do I consistently pronounce his name wrong, he's not even American, and he has no business in the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame. But you get the idea. There are about 100 other names that I could have thrown out there. That's the show. At this point, it's time for another review of the week. This time, it's another one from outside of the United States, and it's a 3-star review titled, Great Podcast, but Missing Some Key Guests. And it comes from Canada Jeff PH, and here is his review. Love the show, Powell, but there's no way I can give you more than 3 stars until you do a show with the GOAT and your former colleague Seth Morrison. It's also hard to believe that you haven't convinced Ryan Schmies to go for a round or two. This may be a coercion, but I will change my rating to a 5 out of 5 for a Seth show or 4 out of 5 for Schmies. Well, Jeff, I thank you for that review, and I'm sure you heard me say before that there is no way that Seth Morrison is going to do the podcast. I have asked him multiple times, and he has gone so far as to block me on Instagram, although I think I'm unblocked at this point. But he doesn't really get back to my text anymore, and I don't think he's going to do a podcast. And you know what? That's fine with me. Seth has done so much for skiing, and I know how much he enjoys his personal time and space, and I'm going to give it to him. As far as Ryan Schmies goes, Ryan's one of my best friends, but working with your friends is not always the easiest thing. And I've tried to get Ryan on, but we can never really nail a date. I don't know why. It's definitely not my fault for not trying to get Ryan on, but Ryan hasn't been able to do it for some reason. He was my first podcast. I did a dummy podcast where I wanted to test it out to see if I could even do something like this. And I did it with Schmies, so he was willing to do that, but he didn't want me to share that with the world. And right now, I don't know what his apprehension is about doing a podcast with me, but when Ryan does a podcast, I anticipate it will be with me. But you are not going to get your Seth interview. You might not get a Schmies interview, and if you're going to leave me with 3 out of 5 stars, that's fine. I don't mind, but if it's based on me not getting 2 guests, whatever, man. Anyways, you do still qualify for a beanie, even though it's not a 5-star review. Everybody does whose review that I read on the show. For you, all you need to do is email me at mike@thepowellmovement, and I will ship a beanie to someone in the United States that you send me their name and address. That's because I'm too lazy and cheap to pay international shipping and do all of the paperwork that it would take me to send it to Canada. So I'm sorry about that. But email me and I will take care of it and make sure your buddy in the US gets a beanie. For everyone else listening, if you want a beanie, all you need to do is review me. If I read it on the podcast, I will ship you one. If you're outside of the United States, I will only ship to someone in the US, but that's a problem that I have that you're probably not going to be stoked on. But anyways, to review me, it's pretty easy. All you need to do is hit the podcast icon on your smartphone, search for the Powell Movement. When you see my logo, press my logo, scroll down to where you see the stars. You can click 5 stars and then you can input a review right there. And that's all you need to do. It takes about a minute and it's greatly appreciated. So I thank you for that. I thank you for listening. And I also want to thank you for supporting my amazing sponsors who make this show happen. They are Stanley, the 10 Barrel Brewery, Dragon, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Alpine Vans, and Rollerblade. Have a great week, everyone.